Hello world! ChatGPT now has an evil twin, millions of US military emails have been leaked, and security researchers hack doors with CCTV cameras. That's all coming up in your roundup of cybersecurity tech news. Cybercriminals have been using ChatGPT ever since it was released, to do everything from write phishing emails to help them code malware. If you browse cybercrime forums, you'll find users discussing all kinds of ways they've weaponized ChatGPT, and some forums have even created whole sections dedicated to the topic. ChatGPT's creator, OpenAI, isn't too happy about all of this, and has tried to crack down on malicious prompts. And so the inevitable has happened. Cybercriminals have created their own AI chatbots, training them on malware-focused datasets and removing the ethical restrictions of tools like ChatGPT. The first of which is called WormGPT, and as soon as it was released, it created absolute panic in the mainstream media. WormGPT, new destructive AI tool that can cause large-scale havoc. WormGPT, new AI tool allows cybercriminals to launch sophisticated cyber attacks. What is WormGPT? The new AI behind the recent wave of cyber attacks. But are all the apocalyptic headlines warranted? So WormGPT is being sold on cybercrime related forums as a kind of ChatGPT with no limitations. It costs €100, that's about $110 per month, so this ain't cheap. But most notably, its creator says that it's not using an OpenAI API, as in this isn't piggybacking off of ChatGPT like other tools that have come before it. Rather, WormGPT relies on an open source large language model called GPT-J, which has been specifically trained with a malware-focused dataset. But is it any good? Is WormGPT going to turn newbie cybercriminals into godlike hackers, the kind of which that can only be found in stock footage? Well, let's have a look at some example prompts. When asked for an example of malware, it'll create a malicious Python script to run on startup, which will recursively delete all files in a user's home folder. In another example, WormGPT can answer basic questions about what features are best in worm malware, and in another, it is pretty good at writing phishing emails. There's a couple more examples that I'll put on screen, and given these prompts are what are being used to advertise WormGPT, I think it's fair to assume that they represent the pinnacle of its capabilities, which might look a bit underwhelming. I mean, sure, this tool does look like fun to play around with, and whilst it might be of use to newbie cybercriminals, this isn't going to put malware creation skills in the hands of anyone who couldn't figure it out on their own. So the mainstream media can chill. WormGPT isn't going to be turning script kiddies into leaked hacksaws anytime soon. However, thanks to those apocalyptic headlines, WormGPT is attracting a lot of newbies, and some of them are very new. I found a bunch of posts across the forum that WormGPT is being sold in, made by confused people with newly created accounts, asking where they can find the elusive WormGPT, despite it quite literally being the first result in a simple forum search. I DM'd the tool's creator, who is actually a regular viewer of this channel, and WormGPT, it seems, is doing pretty well. He says the tool has 180 users, and if those guys are all paying monthly, that'd be $20K per month, as in $250,000 per year. So if there's one thing WormGPT has proved, it's that there's definitely a demand for malicious AI chatbots, and clearly people are willing to pay for it. So WormGPT is only the beginning. Also, I noticed that in the WormGPT sales pitch, the Black Hat Allowed feature was quietly changed to no limitations. I asked the creator about that, and he claims this was because white hats are also using the tool, apparently for research purposes. Speaking of white hat tools that professionals can use to speed up their workflow, I want to tell you about PlexTrack, who were kind enough to sponsor this video. PlexTrack is a cybersecurity reporting and collaboration platform used by the best pentesting teams, empowering them to build better reports in half the time, exponentially increasing their ROI and time savings. PlexTrack helps them aggregate findings from all their tools by consolidating the testing process into one platform, creating a single source of truth, and maximizes their reusable report content like findings, write-ups and narratives, improving consistency across the team. With PlexTrack, you'll become more efficient and effective, delivering better results from every engagement. Simply put, you'll be spending more time hacking and less time reporting. And PlexTrack is offering you a free month of their platform using the link in the description. So big thanks to PlexTrack for sponsoring this video. Next up, for the past 10 years, millions of emails containing sensitive US military documents have been leaked, thanks to a typo. The problem exists because of .mil, which is the top-level domain reserved for US military websites. There's Army.mil, Navy.mil, Air Force.mil, and so on. And if you work for any of these branches of the US military, you'll be assigned a fancy .mil email address. However, for the past decade, many people have forgotten the I in mil, and millions of emails meant to be sent to these .mil email addresses have been mistakenly sent to .ml addresses. But on the surface, this might not seem like a big deal, because for the most part, these .mil domains don't exist as .ml domains, so any emails sent to them would just bounce and the sender would get one of those address not found notifications. But if the organization which manages the .ml top-level domain realized what was going on here, instead of just letting these emails bounce, they could put measures in place to scoop up and save all of these wrongly sent emails. And the owner of the .ml top-level domain is the country of Mali, which is particularly not so great because Mali just so happens to be a close ally of Russia, which I imagine might be interested in millions of sensitive US military emails. But luckily for the US, in 2013, Mali actually sold the rights to the .ml TLD to a Dutch company, from whom you can actually register a .ml domain completely for free, or at least you could until earlier this year, when the site closed registrations thanks to technical issues. Coincidentally, at the same time, Meta actually sued the company, alleging that their free domains are too often used by cybercriminals and that nothing was being done about it. But that's a topic for another video. The guy who runs the Dutch company, Johannes Zerbia, noticed that something was up. There were a bunch of DNS requests to .ml domains that simply didn't exist. On a hunch that this was due to typos in email addresses, he set up mail servers on a bunch of these typo-squatted domains. And his hunch was right. He started scooping up sometimes over 1,000 emails per day, and the documents in those emails were staggering. There were maps of military installations, staff lists at bases, naval inspection reports, identity documents, and so on. Oh, and he didn't just catch documents, but also military personnel would often send passwords in plaintext that could then be used to access DoD websites. This mail server that Johannes had set up was so overwhelmed that he actually had to shut it down, but in the short time it was live, he collected over 117,000 emails. So obviously this was a pretty catastrophic problem for the US military. But instead of deciding to sell his treasure trove to the Russians, Johannes instead decided to notify the US Department of Defense. But this story doesn't end there, because the DoD didn't care. I mean, to put it into perspective, this was reported to the US way back in 2013 when Johannes had only just taken over the rights to .ml domains. Since then, it's reported that he approached US officials repeatedly, including through a defense attaché in Mali, a senior advisor to the US National Cybersecurity Service, and even White House officials, but nothing was ever done. The problem was all the more serious because, firstly, absolutely anyone could just register a .ml domain and start scooping up emails, but more worryingly, Johannes' contract to manage the .ml TLD was about to expire, and control was to revert to Mali's government, a Russian ally. But if there's one way to get the attention of the US government, it's to embarrass the hell out of them. And that's what he did, teaming up with the Financial Times to reveal how a simple typo, mixed in with a bit of incompetence, could have led to one of the biggest US military leaks of all time. But there is more to this story, because other than US officials ignoring or just not caring about the problem, this problem isn't technically their fault. A spokesman for the Pentagon said that if someone with a .mil email address accidentally sends an email to a .ml domain, those emails are blocked before they even leave the .mil domain, and the sender is notified that they must validate the email address of the intended recipients. So the root of the problem here is people with non-mil email addresses, such as military contractors and foreign militaries who are trying to email the US military. And those guys might want to come up with some kind of a fix for this quickly, because as of making this video, the Dutch company's contract has expired, and the Malian government now holds the reins over .ml domains. Next up, this is wild. Security researchers have come up with an ingenious way of unlocking doors protected by smart cards. We've all seen these things before. You find them everywhere, from military bases to hotels. You tap your smart card and the door opens. But what you might not have noticed is that the LED on the card reader flickers when you tap the card. It's very subtle and it's usually so fast you can't even see it. This flickering wasn't implemented on purpose by the designers of the card reader, rather it's an unintended consequence of small changes in power consumption of the card reader's CPU, as it runs its cryptographic algorithm in order to figure out whether or not to open the door. And researchers have figured out that just by recording the flickering of the LED, you can analyze these small changes in power consumption and then extract a card's encryption key. Then you can just copy it to another card, giving you access to whatever's behind the door. No special hardware is required. This can all be done using a phone's camera, but the researchers used a CCTV camera in order to simulate a scenario where a hacker in control of a CCTV system could clone smart cards. So to do this, an attacker would first need to zoom in on and record the LED of a card reader whilst someone taps their card. But this is where the attack gets kinda clever, because a smart card reader's CPU works at thousands, if not millions of operations per second, and the LED will be flickering just as fast. But a typical phone or CCTV camera only shoots at 30 or maybe 60 FPS, which is nowhere near high enough to record this high-speed flickering. I mean, even if you were recording using slow-mo at several hundred frames per second, it wouldn't even scratch the surface of what's required. But the researchers figured out a way, and this might seem crazy, but hear me out, to get 60,000 FPS from a standard phone or CCTV camera. Well, kinda. So in order to make this work, the researchers exploited the fact that camera sensors don't typically record all the pixels for each frame of video all at once. Rather, a camera sensor is read each line of pixels at a time. This explains why you get weird artifacting when you're recording something that's moving quickly, as the object will have moved by the time the next line of pixels is read. It's called the rolling shutter effect, and it looks kinda strange, so it's usually seen as a disadvantage of cheaper camera sensors, and so more expensive film cameras will record the whole frame at once. But a rolling shutter is actually useful here, because the researchers can treat each line of pixels as a new frame, to increase the effective FPS of a CCTV camera from 60 FPS to 60,000 FPS, at which point it's more than possible to analyze the super quick fluctuations in the LED. The researchers then extracted the RGB values from each line of pixels and performed what's called a Minerva attack. This kind of attack exploits the timing of cryptographic operations to infer a card's 256-bit key. But the Minerva attack isn't new, it was first published in 2019. But back then, the attack didn't have anything to do with LEDs and cameras, instead it required physical access to a smart card itself. This new attack, though, basically takes the concept of timing cryptographic operations and Mr. Robotifies the whole thing, to the point where a CCTV camera 16 meters away can steal a card's encryption key. The researchers identified 8 smart card readers that were vulnerable to this kind of attack, so it's not like this only affects 1 or 2 brands on the market. But there are downsides to this attack method. The most obvious one that I came across when looking for stock footage was that when someone taps their card, they often cover up the LED. So if a hacker were to gain control of a CCTV camera, it would have to be in just the right spot for this attack to even be possible. And then there's the problem of time. An attacker would need to capture 65 minutes of smart card operation in order to scoop up all the data they'd need to carry out the cryptanalysis. So this definitely isn't a quick hack. And at the end of the day, mitigating this attack in new versions of smart card readers would be easy and would cost pennies. A simple capacitor over the LED's power lines to smooth out the voltage would likely be enough to render this whole attack useless. Or cheaper still, just get rid of the LED entirely. As always, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.